This video is to help you compare the two different job roles. The emphasis is on the word compare. You will need to write two sections for this thing. In the first one, you need to compare someone from the call centre to somebody from school. I would suggest that you compare Mr. Matthews to Nev. You then need to do the same with a second job role. I would suggest that we compare the finance manager at the call centre to Mrs. Wilkinson. She is the finance manager at HCC. And we'll be looking into these job roles later on in the video. But what I need to mention is we need to compare them. The comparative language we could use is in contrast, however, unlike, similarly, or differently. If you're using, so Mr. Matthews is similar to Nev, or unlike Nev, Mr. Matthews has to do this, then you are definitely going to be comparing. So our first two job roles we're going to look at is Mr. Matthews and Nev. Now, both of them are in charge of a large organisation, but their jobs and how they do it are really, really different. So first of all, we're going to look at the size of the job. The call centre has 600 staff. HCC has 100 staff and about 1,200 students. So in lots of ways, Mr. Matthews has a lot more people to deal with, but the call centre has more employees, so it's a slightly different vibe. Now, if you look at Mr. Matthews and Nev's income, Mr. Matthews is the highest paid member of staff at the school, but he is not a millionaire. But Mr. Matthews will get the same amount of money no matter every year, but Nev will only get his money depending on how well the business has done. So there'll be some years when he probably would earn less than Mr. Matthews, and then quite a few years when he'd probably earn a lot more than Mr. Matthews. So Nev will not always know how much money he's going to get, whereas Mr. Matthews will. So there's a very big difference there. Now, what do they spend their time doing? You know what Mr. Matthews spends his time doing. Sometimes he's on playground duty and he does a lot of meetings and things like that. But is that different to what Nev does? Because Nev is always out motivating his staff, having a laugh, climbing over toilet cubicles. It's very, very different. You don't really see Nev sitting in his office having meetings very much. He is out and about. And he's in meetings when we saw him with Twee and his son, really short. Nev went on holiday during the television programme we watched. He had 1 week out of the whole year. Mr. Matthews has 13 weeks. However, he won't use all 13 for holiday. He'll do some work, but he probably has considerably more than Nev. Now, if we consider their approach to their jobs, Mr. Matthews and Nev could not be further apart. Please put in examples about Mr. Matthews, his serious approach, how he does assemblies and how he talks to students and parents and things like that. He is a serious man, whereas if we think about Nev climbing over toilet cubicles, throwing things at people, generally being silly, they have a very different approach. But both approaches are designed to get the best out of their staff. So if we look below, what are their staff like that they have to manage? Nev has lots of young people working there in a relatively rubbish job that needs a lot of motivation to get on with. Mr. Matthews can trust his staff. They're far more self-motivated, so he can focus on other stuff apart from keeping people jolly. Mr. Matthews also has to be a role model. If he behaved like Nev, he would probably be sacked and the kids would be running absolute riot. So look at the video, think about examples of how they behave differently, how they approach their job. At the end of the day, they're both doing the same job. They are making sure that their organisation hits their aims. For Nev, that's to make money. For Mr. Matthews, it's for all of you lot to do well and be happy. The second role we're going to be comparing is the finance manager. So the call centre has a finance manager and school also has a finance manager who is Mrs. Wilkinson. And their role is exactly the same. They're both in charge of all the money in their organisations. However, there may be a few differences as well. So if we think about how complex the job is, So Miss Wilkinson will be given money from the government each year. I think it's about £5 million that we get given. And it's her job to make sure that everything gets done and we stick within the budget. If we go over budget, we haven't got any money to pay our bills. So basically, she is paying her costs most of the time. Staff are the major cost for it. If we think about the call centre, they will get money if they manage to sell. If they don't manage to sell, they won't get any money. So the call centre finance manager will always be thinking about, oh, where's the money coming from? And also, they won't really know quite how much money they're going to be spending. So they're going to be really have a much more stressful job. Miss Wilkinson's is all about staying in budget. Call centre's far more complex. So what will they spend their time doing? So Mrs. Wilkinson will be setting budgets for departments and teachers, analysing spending, and forward planning to make sure that everything is going to be all right. With the call centre finance manager, they will be looking at the budgets, looking at the sales, setting targets and telling people how urgently they need to get more money, organising the payment to the staff because the staff get different amounts of money each time, whereas Mrs. Wilkinson, we always get the same amount of money. So the call centre finance manager will be really looking at how much money is coming in all the time. They'll both do sets of final accounts, their income statements and balance sheets and stuff like that. That is pretty much how they'll spend their time doing it. Do they have times when they're especially busy? Mrs. Wilkinson will have times when she's especially busy when she's planning for the whole new school year. So she will know how much money she's got. She'll be making sure she's got enough to pay the staff and making all the decisions. So before September, so round about now, she's really, really busy. Call centre will be busy all the time. There will be no unbusy time of the year for them. And finally, what will they worry about most? Now, Mrs. Wilkinson will be worried about a good standard of education and doing it for the money. She'll be really worried about when we have lots of staff off sick and she has to play supply, because that will ruin her budget and she might run out of money. The finance manager at the call centre will be really worried about having enough and getting enough money in, whether sales are on target, all of that sort of stuff. So same job, different things that they do, similarities and differences. We are able to compare them.